This is a weird one. Sonic Generations is one of the best Sonic games ever made, if not the best. However, its companion game, Sonic Generations for 3DS, is almost the polar opposite, maybe? I would say this is actually one of the weakest Sonic games they've ever made, for many reasons. On the surface of it, it's very similar to the main version of Sonic Generations. We have classic Sonic and modern Sonic, both going through zones of previous Sonic games, and each of them has slightly different gameplay. Classic Sonic kind of resembling the original Sonic games, and modern Sonic, of course, having some boost gameplay, though here, because it's just a 3DS game, there's no 3D. This is also 2D gameplay here entirely, so it kind of feels very similar to the Sonic Rush games. Although, unlike the DS Sonic games, modern Sonic here doesn't switch back and forth between the two screens. It's just one screen, so it plays more like just a traditional 2D platformer, but with similar boost mechanics to kind of the Rush games, or just the general boost style overall. And that's all fine. That's all hunky-dory, no problems with any of that. The problems come in with the execution of basically everything. Let's start with classic Sonic. So, first of all, physics-wise, I probably don't even have to say this, but classic Sonic does not play like the original Genesis games. I mean, obviously, if the main version of Generations can't have accurate physics, then there's no reason to expect this game to have it either. Though in some ways it's kind of more accurate than the main game of Generations, but in other ways it's less accurate. It doesn't feel horrible, but it definitely doesn't feel great. There is some clunkiness to the controls in this game. Sometimes a collision just doesn't really work the way you would expect it to. Sometimes certain things just feel very bad. It's not a horrible feeling game, but it's definitely not a great feeling game either. And another thing to point out, that could be a good thing or bad thing, depending on how you look at things, is Classic Sonic does not have the spin dash button in this game, and the ridiculously overpowered spin dash that he had in the main Generations. Here, it's just like the original games. You crouch, mash, jump, and release, and it doesn't go nearly as fast. So that means you gotta play the levels mostly in line with the original Sonic games, which is certainly nice. I enjoy the crazy overpowered spin dash of Generations, but there's no denying that that's just ridiculous and probably shouldn't be the way the game works. So this is a little bit more tame and less game-breaking, which can be a good thing, if that's what you prefer. Personally, I like the crazy overpowered spin dash of the main Generations, but this is fine too. What's not fine, in my opinion, is I don't even know why the hell they thought this was a good idea, but for some reason, they have given Classic Sonic the homing attack as a permanent ability in this game. What the heck are you doing? That is so bizarre. First of all, considering that we have modern Sonic already in this game with the homing attack, it makes no sense because this game having modern being entirely 2D, the two Sonics already play more similarly to each other than they do in the other generations. So why would you want to make them play even more similarly by giving them moveset overlaps like this? It's so strange. Not to mention the fact that the homing attack doesn't even really have a meaningful purpose in classic 2D Sonic gameplay, but that's something we can talk about in another video. But for now, suffice it to say, Classic Sonic in this game is not great. It's not awful either, I wouldn't say, but not awful is not exactly a glowing recommendation, is it? And truthfully, I don't find modern Sonic to be that much better here either. Modern Sonic, as I said, has boost gameplay, kind of like the Rush games, just in the fact that it's all 2D. But it also does have the infinite boost mechanic from the Rush games returning. When you fill the meter all the way, you get a brief time of unlimited boost, and that's kind of cool. Though there's no trick system here, so you can't maintain it nearly as well, so it's kind of like a half-and-half thing, but it's a nice mechanic to see returned. Outside of that, you got a lot of your boost staples, wall jumping, stomping, etc., etc. You know what to expect here. And the gameplay is, yep, that typical QTE-like gameplay. Slide under the thing, do the homing attack chains, whatever. And, it's okay, I guess, for the most part, but it still kind of suffers from the not great game feel of this game. So, similar to classic Sonic, it ultimately ends up feeling like just a lesser version of something that you get in other Sonic games. Like, there's really no reason to play this as opposed to playing any of the Rush games, or Colors for DS, or any of the main Boost games. This is just that same kind of gameplay, but not as good. And another main big contributing factor to the weakness of Sonic Generations for 3DS to me is in the level design, because there are some serious problems here. First things first, this game only has 7 zones as opposed to the main generation's 9, so there are less levels in this game. That's not a huge problem in and of itself, but what is kind of a problem in my opinion is that not all of these levels are new levels. Like, yes, Sonic Generations, we revisit old zones, but the actual level designs are all brand new in that game. Here, that is not always the case. For example, all of the classic zones, the classic act in all of those zones is a direct one-for-one remake of the original levels from the original games. I have no idea why they would choose to do this. A part of me thinks it's maybe just laziness. You don't have to design as many levels, just copy and paste level design. It is really, really weird, and it just goes to highlight how this game is just an inferior version of other games, because you're playing through these levels and it's nowhere near as good as if you were just playing the actual games these levels are from. And you also get to see some of those issues with, like, collision detection and stuff, because you know how this level design is supposed to work, and you try to play it like that, and then it doesn't work correctly. Like, yeah, sure, these are good levels, and they are fun to play, but they're more fun to play in their original games. By importing the level design from those games into this game, it really just highlights how this game isn't as good as those games. It would be much better if we just had original levels here that you could only experience in this game, so that way at least you could get a new experience as opposed to just an inferior version of an experience you get elsewhere. And it's not just the classic zones, believe it or not, that do this. Some of the later zones do it as well. For example, Water Palace, the modern act here, the level design is not exactly one-to-one the same, but it is very close. There is a lot of similar level layouts and geometry and general platforming here. And Tropical Resort, the classic act here, is also very, very similar in layout to Act 1 from the DS game. So that is basically 5 levels in this game out of its 14 total that are just inferior versions of levels from better Sonic games. We only get 9 new original levels here. And I have to say, the level design in these new levels is pretty weak for the most part. A lot of it has major issues that you don't see a lot of in other Sonic games. Take classic Radical Highway, for example. There's a part in this level early on where you basically do nothing but hold right for 30 seconds straight. I also found trying to predict passivity traps to be really difficult to do in this game. The level pacing here just feels really off. And similar to other 2D Sonic games around this time, I was finding myself with a lot of camera issues where the camera is so zoomed in that you just can't see anything. You have no idea what you're supposed to be doing or what's coming up, so a lot of it is just having to memorize level design if you want to get a decent run. But even then, sometimes in like the modern levels, they try to do like fancy cameras, and you just literally cannot see anything what you're doing. You have to do like a big air boost across a giant gap and land on a platform, and you cannot see it whatsoever. You have no idea what you're aiming for. It's just a shot in the dark whether or not you're gonna make it. It sucks, dude. It is really bad. And even when the level design isn't doing awful things like that, at best, it's just kind of serviceable Sonic level design. It doesn't do anything exemplary. It never gets particularly creative or cool or interesting. It's all the same tricks that we've seen over and over and over in so many other Sonic games, but like I said, just kind of worse because this game doesn't feel very good, and the level design often does get really annoying. And that's why I say this is one of the weakest 2D Sonic games I think they've ever done. The two main core elements of a Sonic game are the controls and physics and the level design, and this game messes up both of those, and that is pretty unforgivable. I mean, like I said, I don't think this is a terrible game. I think you can play it and have some fun. But I really struggle to recommend this game when you could play any other 2D Sonic game and get a better experience out of it. And it's really a shame because Dimps was really killing it for a while with the 2D Sonic games, with the Advanced games, the Rush games, Colors DS, all good games. And then we get to their games around this time, and they really started to fumble with them. I assume that has to do with the fact that Akinori Nishiyama was the director of the advanced games in the first Sonic Rush, and at this time he was head of Sonic Team. He was no longer directing these games. And also, Dimps was starting to pump out more 2D Sonic games at the same time. Before, they were doing one at a time, but around here is when they started to make multiple 2D Sonic games at once, which means you have to probably split up the team or have an A team and a B team making different games at the same time, so you're spreading the talent around and maybe getting lesser experienced devs in lead roles that maybe aren't really up to the task or something like that. I don't really know, but what I do know is that Dimps made some of my favorite Sonic games ever, and then they kind of fell off a little bit, and that is a shame. And it's also a shame for the concept of Sonic Generations for 3DS. I like that this game chose to use different zones than the main version. So, in theory, if this was a worthwhile game to play, then you could play both generations and you'd get a double helping of Sonic history celebration goodness with really fun games. But it just didn't end up working here, so it kind of just feels a bit wasted. Though I also do personally feel the zone choices here are a bit questionable. I like, for example, the Water Palaces in here from Sonic Rush. I think that's super cool. And it makes me think that this game would have been cooler if it had been a celebration of handheld Sonic games. So instead of having Sonic Adventure and Adventure 2, get some advanced zones in there, you know? Or instead of Sonic 2 or 3 of Knuckles, get some zones from like Sonic Chaos or Triple Trouble. Although those are not Sonic Team games, so they're not allowed to be referenced because Sonic Team... but, you know, it would have been cool if the handheld game was a celebration of handheld Sonic and the console game was a celebration of console Sonic. But, whatever, it's not really that big of a deal, and the game's not even that good anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Let's see, outside of the core gameplay, what do we have here? We have boss fights, and they are pretty typical fare for the most part. Like the main generations, you have two kinds of bosses. You have rival fights, and then, like, your bigger main boss fights. And the main boss fights are whatever, they're fine, I guess. Very standard stuff. Nothing to write home about. The rival fights are kind of cool in concept, in that you are racing against a rival, and it kind of makes me think Sonic Rivals, which is kind of cool, because like I said, celebration of handheld Sonic. But at the end of the day, you're still playing this game with its controls and physics, so they're not super fun, but I like the idea. I like this concept for Sonic boss fights to be a race. Also, of course, harkens back to the Metal Sonic race in Sonic CD, so it's a cool idea. I wish it was in a better Sonic game. And the Super Sonic final boss here, I will say, I do think is better than the console version of Sonic Generations. It doesn't mean it's particularly good, but I actually do know what to do here, unlike that version. It's very simple and straightforward, so I'll take it. Speaking of Super Sonic, an interesting thing about Generations for 3DS is that unlike the main version of Generations, you don't just get the Chaos Emeralds in this game for just playing through the game. There are actually special stages here that you have to complete, and they made an interesting choice here as well. Instead of coming up with some new special stages for this game, we are revisiting the special stages from Sonic Heroes, and I think that is a really good choice, because the Sonic Heroes special stages didn't work, so we never got the chance to really play them for real in that game. So now here is their second chance to actually be functional, and now we can play them for real and see if this kind of special stage is any good or not. And yeah, these definitely do control and feel infinitely better than they did in Sonic Heroes, so that is nice. But still, at the end of the day, I don't think that these are particularly great special stages. They're very simple, very easy, very straightforward, and over very quickly. Not the worst special stages I've ever played in my life, but certainly not the best either. Let's see, we also have missions in this game, like a number of Sonic games have had, and like a number of Sonic games, they're really not worth your time here. They're nowhere near the caliber that you find in the main generations. These are much more similar to things like the missions from Sonic Rush Adventure or something like that, where they're very blasé and not very fun or interesting, and I really wouldn't recommend doing them. And I think that is Generations for 3DS, right? Oh wait, I forgot to talk about Time Attack, because I just don't really care about this game, so I wasn't even thinking about it. Yeah, I started doing it, but with all this game's issues, I just honestly could not be bothered to finish doing all of the levels. I just was not having enough fun. I just do not enjoy this game that much, which I think really says all that needs to be said about this game. Like I said, this is essentially the polar opposite of Sonic Generations. Sonic Generations is a game that takes a bunch of levels from previous Sonic games that were very flawed and does them way better than the original games, whereas Generations for 3DS takes levels from older Sonic games and does them worse than the original games, which is not exactly a great celebration of the history of Sonic. Personally, I would really struggle to recommend this game to anyone but the absolute hardest of hardcore Sonic fans that want to play every single Sonic game out there. But to most people, I think this game is very passable. I really wouldn't say you're missing out on anything important here. And personally, I would say that this is the first major misstep for Sonic for me. Like, of course, many games have been very flawed and had a lot of problems in the past. But as the title of this series says, Sonic was always good. I think that pretty much every Sonic game that I've covered so far in the series has some value, some fun, something to enjoy about it. But this is the first Sonic game that I've gotten to in this series that I really just don't care for, and I don't know if I'm honestly ever gonna play this game again. I really just kind of don't like it.